Hello, everyone. In these difficult times when borders have closed and nations have turned inward to understandably deal with the coronavirus pandemic, I think it's really important that we continue to stay connected to world affairs. So here's my second in my series of conversations on Iran, in which I'll be talking to lawmakers, journalists, activists, and Iran experts to hopefully demystify and make the subject more accessible to the general public. Joining me today is someone who really doesn't need any introduction, but he's one of the world's foremost journalists covering the Middle East and South Asia. He's covered the crisis in Syria, the crisis in Lebanon, the uprisings in Yemen, and so much more. He worked at the Miami Herald and the Los Angeles Times before joining the New York Times in 2000. Among his countless accolades, he won a Pulitzer Prize in 2009 as part of a team of Times journalists covering Pakistan and Afghanistan. His book, The Forever War, won the 2008 National Book Critics Circle Award for nonfiction. He joined the New-Yorker as a staff writer in 2011, and I'm hugely honored that he said yes to discussing his latest piece, Letter from Iran, which is filled with stunning quotes and revelations from a country that notoriously cracks down on a free and fair press. Dexter Filkins, thank you for joining me.
I'm blushing, but thank you very much.
Dexter, your piece is groundbreaking in so many ways because, as I said, it's so hard to get accurate reporting out of Iran. You've been trying to get to Iran for a while now, and finally in February they granted you a visa. Why, in this time, do you think they did that? And how did it all come about?
I swear I don't know what happened. As you say, for years I'd been applying. I've been to Iran before, but long ago when Ahmadinejad was president, and I hadn't been able to get in since. And had just tried so many times, and I always got the same answer, which was kind of funny. As an American, they say, "Not right now. It's really bad right now. The relationship is really bad. You know, try again in a few months." And of course, the relationship is always really bad, and so it was always like, "Come back next month." So I just, in February, I got a phone call out of the blue. And it was a guy in the American or the Iranian interest section in Washington who said, your visa's been granted for 6 days and it starts tomorrow. So you got to get on a plane right now. And so literally I grabbed a bunch of money and a pair of blue jeans and ran out the door.
That's extraordinary. And then so you said 6 days, you were there for 6 days.
They actually extended it. They gave me some more time. They gave me a few more days. And it was interesting because the last day I got was the day before the parliamentary elections. Mm-hmm. And they made it absolutely clear that they weren't going to let me see those. And because I said, can I have one more day? And my sense was that they were a little worried about the turnout. And so maybe didn't want me to see a kind of a light turnout if in fact it was.
Right. And so you got there before the first COVID deaths were reported.
Yes. And everybody was really nervous about coronavirus because it was, not terribly far away in China.
Right.
And of course there's a lot of Iranian flights on Mahan Air.
Yeah.
And so everybody was talking about it. Everybody except the government was talking about it, basically. And so there was this moment. It was right before I left, so it was kind of late February. I think it was February 17th. Mm-hmm. They announced 2 coronavirus deaths, and this Iranian journalist who I spoke to later said, "Yeah, we all laughed because we're the only country in the world that we reported deaths from the virus before we actually reported any infections, because there had been, I think it's fair to say, at least as reported, there had been a great deal of pressure on them not to write about it and not to write about what appears to have been early cases of the coronavirus in Iran."
Right. And why do you think that was? Because you spoke to journalists and doctors on the ground in Iran who spoke of the cover-up and what they had to do by the instructions by authorities.
Yes, I did. And they were very convincing. And really, I mean, I should just say now, every Iranian I spoke to was so brave to talk to me, and they trusted me, and they put themselves at great risk, particularly these guys, the doctors and the journalists who talked about this. Their sense was that it was about the elections. It was if we start telling people about this terrible virus, nobody's going to come out to vote, and so keep it quiet. In fact, for the doctors, it was like, don't even wear masks, don't protect yourself. We don't want to cause a panic.
And that you went through some sort of clandestine, very 007 moves to get to your sources. Can you tell us, did you feel afraid at any point?
Yeah, yes. I wasn't really sure, like I was really paranoid when I got there.
Yeah.
And I thought, of course, they're watching me, they're following me. I think in retrospect, actually, they weren't. But I did have a minder. Like, I had a person who was sort of assigned to me to take me around town, but also to watch me and to make sure that I didn't have conversations with people that the government didn't approve of. And my minder was really nice. She was a really nice person. But what that means effectively is that every conversation you have is kind of boring, because it's like very predictable, and everybody says the same thing. And in this case, it was, we're going to vote. We can't wait to vote. We love the government. We love Rouhani, et cetera, et cetera. And so it wasn't the truth, that's for sure. But it's like super limited. And so it all felt very strange, because on one hand, they let me in, they let me come. But on the other hand, they don't really let you work.
Right. So how did you get away from that? How did you find people to talk to?
I swear it's crazy, because they don't give you any warning. You don't have time to prepare. So I didn't have any time to get ready. And what I would have done is I would have called my Iranian friends who know people inside the country, and I would have set up a bunch of things with people inside Iran. And, that sort of thing takes a lot of time, and particularly because people are nervous, and so I didn't have any time for that. So I had to do it very, very quickly. So literally, when I was changing planes in Istanbul, I was sending emails to my Iranian friends saying, do you know anyone who will talk to me inside, in Tehran? And so I had kind of a list of people when I got there, and I slowly started making appointments. But I had to sneak out at night. I had to sneak out. And yeah, it was really weird, because I wasn't really too worried about me. I think at worst, they hold me for a couple of days and then they kick me out of the country or something. But I was really worried about the Iranians I was meeting, because they were at risk.
Of course. And I think it's impossible to read your piece and not walk away with a deep appreciation for the risks journalists put themselves.
Well, I guess. I mean, but honestly, at the end of the day, I mean, I had a bit of a scary time at the end, which is in the story, at the airport. That was kind of creepy. But what really struck me was the risks that Iranians were willing to take to talk to me. Like, I just couldn't, they don't even know who I am. And they don't know, even if I make a mistake, or even if the security guys grab my notebooks, which they didn't do. Even if they grab my tape recorder or something, and then everything would be in there and their lives would be over. And for all of that, I had, more people to meet than I had time, who were willing to take these incredible risks to talk to me, and to kind of bare their souls to me and tell me their life stories. It was really moving.
No, it's really admirable. I mean, the courage it takes. This particular moment in time feels particularly fraught, I think, for US-Iran relations.
Yeah.
You're talking about the aftermath of the November 2019 protests, the biggest riots that Iran has seen since the revolution. And hundreds of people being killed by the authorities, far more crackdown than we've ever seen before. Like then you have Qasem Soleimani, the Iranian shadow commander, killed by the US. Then you have, of course, the shooting down of the Ukraine passenger flight by an Iranian missile, 176 people killed on that flight. And then you have the parliamentary elections and the pandemic. And it feels like the least opportune time for the Iranian government to let an American journalist into the country. And yet here we are. And it's filled with this fascinating, you spoke to some really interesting people. And Faiza Rafsanjani, the daughter of President Rafsanjani, who talked about how she believes that this is, in essence, the twilight of the regime. Can you tell us a bit about that? And also, is that the sentiment that you got overall from people inside Iran, not the scripted people that you met that, you know, with your mom, but people you experienced, and the general feeling that you had when you were...
That's a really good question. I think, I mean, first, Faiza Rafsanjani, I was really impressed by her. And I'm sure it's more complicated if you're Iranian, you know, whatever. But everything she said to me was enough to get her arrested, I felt like. And she did it anyway. And she didn't pull a single punch, as you can see. And basically, I thought she summed up everything. I saw her right at the end, right before I left. And I thought she kind of encapsulated everything that I felt like I was seeing and feeling, which is there's this kind of sense of, there's a sense of despair, that this thing isn't working, but this thing can't change. And it was, I thought she put that very well.
So she didn't ask for you to retract or keep her identity? No,
I mean, you know, most of the people that I met did do that. You know, like there's a young woman who I was really struck by, named Sarah, who essentially compared. Now, you know, she's a young woman. Compared living in Iran to living inside the Handmaid's Tale, basically. This is Gilead.
You actually talked about the fact, which I find very interesting, and barely anyone ever talks about, that the Supreme Leader Khamenei's wife has not once been photographed in 4 decades. And that, to me, even when she gives interviews, she doesn't have her photograph accompanying that piece, which I think is just a great observation as far as how women's rights are diminished in Iran, and their voices and their presence are sort of are not acknowledged in a lot of ways.
Yeah, I mean, I felt like, particularly talking to the young people, they're so modern, and they're so aware of. They're kind of aware. I mean, I hate to put it this way, but they're kind of aware of what they're missing, and they're aware of kind of what they're being denied, and maybe because they have access to the internet or social media. But I just feel like if that's a whole generation, and that's a lot of people, and they're coming. I mean, they want to be free, and I can't. It's hard for me to imagine that government or any government could contain that. I mean, just over time, there's too many of them, and they're just like talking to Sarah, like she's confident, you know, she's not giving up. And as she said, I am prepared to go to jail, and everyone I know feels the same way. I mean, how do you stop that?
Yeah. I mean, I think when people are willing to put their lives at risk to stand for their rights, you have to assume that a larger number of that portion of that society feel the same way. They just might be scared to express those same sentiments.
Yes. It was like a lot of people have lost their fear.
Yeah.
And I think that was definitely true. You mentioned the November protests. Definitely true there. Like, people were coming out. In many cases, they were attacking the police, which is, you know, kind of mind-boggling. But they've lost their fear. or they've lost their hope. I mean, they clearly haven't lost their hope if they're out there protesting, but
it feels like they have nothing more to lose.
Exactly. I didn't run into people who loved President Trump or who, thought the sanctions were a good idea, but I certainly thought that I would hear a lot more people saying all of our problems are because of America. Mm-hmm. This is basically what the government says, and I just didn't hear it. And I tried to give people a chance to say it, and they just it was like, yes, but we don't like Trump, but the real problem is here.
Yeah. Which also tracks with the protest, the chants that we had in the protest in 2009.
I mean, it's crazy. Like when you think that that the revolution was founded on, one of its kind of founding principles, it was and still is kind of is antipathy towards the United States, justified or not. But here the protesters were throwing that back at them, that very thing, and saying, the enemy is not America, the enemy is here.
One thing I want to quickly touch on, because I think this is going to be interesting for people. You probably gave the best definition of tarof I've had in my life, which you called you described as the Persian tradition of overweening or possibly insincere politeness. I wish there was just one word in English that defined this word that we have, tarof. But did you actually experience this in Iran?
Oh my God, yes. Yes. Because I'm a sort of fumbling Westerner, I can just ask very direct questions and say, like, can you just, or did they really want us to stay for dinner? Should we stay for dinner? And then, my Iranian friend would say, no, they don't.
Just be nice. Be nice.
But it's like, it's a product of this like extremely polite culture. Like Iran is so much more, manners and politeness are so much more important there than they are in a place like the United States, and I'm in New York City, where like everybody has sharp elbows. And if they don't want to invite you to dinner, they are not going to ask.
Yeah. And did you get the sense that you, as an American, the majority of Iranians that you met, were they welcoming of you as an American? How did you feel? Like?
Oh yeah, it was amazing. It was. I mean, I loved it, and people were really warm. I mean, I had this weird feeling a couple of times. I thought I was in Italy, because as in Italy, people are very beautiful. They're very warm. They're kind of very welcoming, and I didn't feel any hostility. I really, except in official circles where I definitely felt some real coldness. No, and again, that was kind of the sense of the tragedy that I had, which is people to people, Americans to Iranians. Yeah, there's like we don't have that much to fight about.
Yeah, basically we all want freedom, and we all want to just get along.
Yes.
And I think it's very telling that, the American flags that the authorities paint sometimes at university, like steps at the university, so that it forces students to walk over them. And the majority, there are videos out there of the majority of students avoiding walking on the American flag.
Oh, man.
As a show of, we are not, there's no hostility between the people. This is just something that has been politicians,
Well, like when I was there for the anniversary of the revolution. So I went to the big parade, the big procession.
Yeah.
And, like people were like lining up to talk to me. they couldn't wait, and I was like happy to talk to them. So, but it was like really, again, it just, it makes me sad more than anything, because there's these kind of terrible walls that prevents that from happening. And, it's kind of like, I think, the average American doesn't know much about Iran, and doesn't think much about it. And that kind of accentuates that sadness that you can feel,
Yeah, and it's interesting you say that, because the big show of numbers, the people in the processions supposedly supporting or celebrating the anniversary of the regime coming into power, you actually tell us about this in your piece, where a lot of people were sort of forced to go out there, or pushed to go out there and show their support for the revolution. So again, images that we may see, like the processions for Soleimani, or in support of the anniversary of the revolution, are not necessarily based in truth, are they?
Right. It's like we see these images, of course, which are just basically, I think, cliches, right, for the Iranians, they're cliches, right? Death to America, death to Israel, blah, blah, blah. And of course they see ours. But yeah, like I remember, I put this in the story, but I remember I was sitting in a cafe and I was kind of planning my day on the anniversary. And the waitress, who of course spoke perfect English, said to me, "Oh my God, you're going to that? Nobody goes to that." They bust them in, and they're all forced. But, and that was unsolicited.
Yeah.
And then she walked away.
That's incredible. And again, for me, the takeaway is, for anybody who says, look, these people all support the revolution and they support what the clerics are saying, death to America, it's not true. It's actually not true. The people have very warm feelings towards Americans and America. It's really just the government. Yeah. So
it just leaves you hoping that someday things will change, which I can't imagine they won't.
Yeah, I mean, that's in essence the title of your piece, The Twilight of the Revolution, which I took away from it. Yeah, well, you can tell us what you took away from visiting Iran.
It feels like Twilight. Now, maybe Twilight lasts a long time. Maybe, I mean, because I think the kind of more cynical part of me says, because I've seen this in other countries, as long as a regime like that has people who are willing to pull the trigger, they can stay in power a long time. And as we saw in November, where at a minimum several hundred people were killed, I think, possibly way more. As long as they got people willing to do that, they can stay in power a long time. So maybe they will, but I feel like the thing is fragile. It's definitely fragile because it just doesn't have I didn't feel it, the popular legitimacy.
Wow. Okay. And so my final question is really about you getting out of Iran, because I have friends who journalists, and their names, and the fate of someone like Bob Levinson, or I mean, all of those things would concern me, and yet you're Dexter Filkins, so you're the 007 of journalists. Let's talk about how you actually exited Iran in one piece.
I did. It was pretty scary. I wasn't thinking about it. I mean, I just thought I was going to go to the airport and get on the plane. But I had seen this Western ambassador in Tehran right before I went to the airport, and he said, "Just watch out for the second checkpoint at the airport. The second one. That's the IRGC checkpoint. Who knew? Maybe a lot of your viewers know, but so sure enough, when I got to that second checkpoint, I felt a hand on my shoulder, and it was it was a guy in uniform who said, "We have some questions." And so they pulled me in a room, and they didn't let me get my stuff out of the X-ray machine, but they took me into this tiny room, and there were 6 of them, and the room was so small and they were all very big guys, and our knees were touching. It was very cramped and very uncomfortable, and they were not smiling. There was no taruf. They and no chit chat, and so they got right down to it. Yeah, it was pretty scary.
Yikes! Well, I'm glad you made it out, Dexter. I really am. Before I let you go, I just wanted to say, one thing I'm not clear on is, why did they let you in? Like, what was the benefit? What did you think? How did you assess this? Like, what did you think was the benefit to them to let you in?
No, I mean, I feel like there was this moment after Soleimani got killed, when I think the country came together around Soleimani. But that evaporated the moment the Ukrainian airliner was shot down. So that was like later the same day. So I feel like I don't know. I feel like this black box, which is, you know, the Iranian bureaucracy, it just kind of spit this piece of paper out that said, you may come. And, you know, why it spit it out, we'll never know. But, you know, I thank them.
Yes, I hope that everyone reads this this piece. It's really, truly exceptional, and it's such a snapshot of what I'm hearing, and a lot of Iran watchers are hearing from inside Iran. And it's great to have these anecdotes and sources and quotes, and you are a rock star. And thank you for being with us.
Thank you so much. And thanks to everybody listening in Iran.
Bye.